"I'll put 250,000 on the table," said the man in the cobalt suit, fanning cash with tattooed fingers beneath chandeliers. "If you can serve my deaf son in Chinese." La Fortuna held its breath. Knives hovered, glass stems stilled. The boy in the tuxedo tracked the green arc of bills the way a swimmer watches a wave, hoping it won't break on him. Beside him, a woman in a yellow blazer arranged her smile into something meant to steady a child. Between them stood the waitress in red, hands folded at her apron, posture neat, gaze level. The man tilted the cash toward the room until money became a spotlight. His ink announced the role he preferred. Mafia across the brow, boss stenciled into his cheek, so there would be no confusion about who wrote the script here. "You work for tips, sweetheart," he added, pointing the fan of bills at the woman in red. "Consider this the tip of your life." A few tables laughed. Others pretended to chew. Somewhere a violin swallowed a note. Candlelight steadied the scene. Gold pooled softly across glass. The boy's hearing aids caught the light. He mouthed something to the waitress and then looked down, as if he had been taught that questions cost more than answers. The waitress breathed once, slow enough to stop a tremor. 250,000 could sand down 100 sharp edges. It could buy time, treatment, quiet. But the offer wasn't wage. It was theater. He wanted a performance where she would be small and his laughter would be the applause. "Mr. Moretti," she said, voice soft enough to force the room to lean closer. "My name is Amara. If your son smiles tonight, you'll apologize to him, in the same language you used to shame him." The grin he returned had the shine of a clean knife. He snapped for the special menu. "Deal, but no phrases, conversation. If you fail, you'll kneel right here and tell the room what you are." The dining hall organized itself into an audience. Servers drifted into doorways. Phones woke behind crystal. The woman in yellow stopped smiling. The boy's fingers made a restless tapping on the cloth, as if his hands were birds rehearsing a sky. Amara turned to him first. She lowered to his eyeline so the words and the respect would arrive together. She signed a greeting in American Sign, then repeated it using a Chinese rhythm, letting hands carry syntax while her mouth shaped gentle Mandarin tones he might feel more than hear. The boy's face opened, cautious, curious. "Start with soup," Moretti said, drumming the menu he had not read. "Impress my table." His rings made the leather sound like a gavel. His eyes toured the chandeliers to make sure the scene still belonged to him. It didn't. Not entirely. Something had shifted when the waitress addressed the child before the cash. Audiences recognized that pivot without needing subtitles. The kitchen door hinged twice, revealing cooks angling for a view. A busser paused mid-polish, napkin held like a truce flag. Amara's smile was not the one restaurant's train. It was the light winter keeps for mornings when the air is sharp but survivable. She accepted the menu like a formality, like a map she already knew by heart. "Kids like jokes," Moretti offered, performing benevolence the way some perform cruelty, loudly, for proof. He lifted the cash again as if green paper could bless the room. Amara faced the boy. She signed the shape of a riddle, simple as a pebble, then whispered its Mandarin twin, pointing to the rosebud in the silver vase for the punchline. The boy's mouth ticked upward. Not a laugh yet, and almost is the hinge hope uses. "You see?" Moretti told his guests. "Halfway there." His smile said he intended to decide where the finish line was. The woman in yellow caught Amara's eye, and then the ink on the man's wrist. A small proverb curved there in Chinese characters, a relic pulled from a life the boy only half remembered. Recognition landed like a feather with the weight of iron. Amara placed a glass in front of the child, angled to his dominant hand because she had noticed. She narrated the pour in mid-register Mandarin, clear, tempered, exact, and signed a compact version in Chinese sign. The boy watched both channels of meaning as if the room had finally tuned itself to his frequency. "What did I say about tourists?" Moretti asked, but some furniture had gone out of his voice. He flattened the cash fan, then rebuilt it, a man mending the illusion he lives inside. A table at the back returned to its food pantomime. No one believed it. The chandeliers kept humming their gold. The violinist found his missing note and hung it from the ceiling like a lantern. "This is your last chance to back out," Moretti announced, generous as a threat. "No shame in admitting limits." Amara touched the child's sleeve and waited for a nod. Consent came like a small, brave sunrise. She lifted her hands and began, not with a joke and not with soup, but with a story sturdy enough to carry a boy across an hour. Her mouth braided Mandarin vowels soft as felt. Her hands wrote the current into light. The boy leaned forward, gravity revised. At one edge of the table, the cash waited like a wrong ending. At the other sat a white plate ready for a beginning properly named. The corridor air shifted. The room exhaled. Somewhere by the bar, a camera lens blinked open. "Okay, Professor," Moretti said, amused and uneasy, accidentally correct. "Let's see whether you can do more than tricks." She could. She would. But the how of it didn't belong to this breath. First comes the reason a woman who speaks 12 languages is carrying plates under chandeliers at a Mafia restaurant, smiling like winter sunlight and refusing to kneel for money. First comes the passport, the classroom, and the night a phone call broke her life into before and after. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. And trust me, the best part is yet to come. Now, let's get back to it. The kitchen swallowed her like a stage wing. Steam, steel, the choreography of heat. Pans hissed in quick consonants. Ticket printers stuttered like nervous drummers. Somewhere a prep cook whispered, "That's him, right? The one with the ink?" And someone else shushed him, because even rumors bow in rooms like this. Amara set the silver tray on the pass and let her hands rest on its rim until the cool metal steadied her pulse. She could feel the dining room through the wall, the chandelier hum, the velvet murmur of money, the boy's small attention reaching for her like a wire pulled taut. She closed her eyes. 12 doors opened in the dark. Door 1, Oxford. A lecture hall washed in November light, chalk dust floating like lifted snow. "Language is a map of attention," she told rows of students. "Change the map, change what the mind can find." She diagrammed tonal Sandy with a broken piece of white chalk and watched boredom turn into wonder. Afterwards, her supervisor clasped her shoulder. "You make phonetics feel like music," he said. She pretended not to glow. Door 2, Geneva, a glass box overlooking a lake so calm it looked backstage. She wore a headset and sat between flags, her voice a wire from world to world. Ambassadors lifted their paragraphs with careful tongs. She ferried meaning like a smuggler carrying light. During recessions in the agenda, she taught herself the quiet engineering of trust. Choose verbs you can stand under. Fold warmth into precision. Leave ego outside the booth. Door 3. A basement lab. Humming. She trained models to hear the difference between a threat and a proverb across dialects. She tuned neural nets until they could tell a joke from a code word by the way laughter bent a vowel. Her badge read contractor, but the case officer who never smiled called her the ear. On a whiteboard, she wrote, "Timbre is memory. Under it, smaller. And memory is motive." Door 4 opened on Harlem, neon glancing off rain. Her father's trumpet on a Wednesday night, blue smoke, red leather, customers clapping in threes. David Lewis played like time owed him interest. He called her professor even when she was 5, even when she was 30, even when she tried to convince him that favors from men who keep ledgers inside their skin were not lifelines, but chains. "Baby," he said, polishing the horn that was both mortgage and prayer. "I pay what I owe." He smiled, which is what men do right before they don't. Night of the phone call. Her body learned the grammar of collapse. Words arrived out of order and refused to conjugate into sense. Found behind the club, sorry for your loss, identification required. She stood beneath the fluorescent mercy of a precinct lobby and traced the corners of a plastic chair until the world remembered how to be three-dimensional. The detective kept looking at his notes. "Neck," he said, and stopped there. She nodded as if she understood, because grief makes people hospitable to other people's limits. Later, in a room with no windows, she saw the photo. The mark at the throat was small, almost polite. Not a wound, more like a signature, as if the body had been co-signed by a ghost. 2 characters, tight and elegant, inked once upon a time into a hand that knew the cost of flourish. The detective called it a calling card. She called it evidence and asked for a copy. He said no and slid the folder closer to his chest. She memorized it anyway, the way a singer memorizes water. Door 5, the bank. The number under balance coughed at her like a sick joke. Door 6, the university office where compassion arrived as a form. "Take all the time you need," they said, meaning until we need your office back. Door 7, the law office where a woman with careful hair lifted her eyes over a fee schedule and said, "We can't promise anything." Door 8, the club without a trumpet, just a handful of men avoiding eye contact, and a bartender who would not say the name he was thinking. A year later, she found the mark again, not in a folder, but on a living man. A wrist flashed during a handshake, 2 characters curved like a private smile. She filed the sighting in a cabinet labeled Unfinished Business and kept walking. You learn to walk past the door you want to open when you lack the key and the time to be arrested for trying. Survival isn't cinematic. It is bills paid on the right day and grief folded small enough to fit under a blouse. La Fortuna hired her because she was punctual and good with difficult tables. She accepted because the math worked and the room taught a language not taught anywhere else. How power orders dinner. Wall Street in winter asks for burgundy like confession. Oligarchs test caviar like it might bite back. Visiting ministers watch the room the way hunters watch tree lines. She learned to carry plates invisibly and to collect accents the way other people collect coins. Every night while knives rehearsed their clatter, she ran conjugations down a private track, Mandarin tones on the inhale, Arabic measure patterns on the exhale, Spanish subjunctive on the pause between. 12 tongues filed to attention like 12 good soldiers. When someone mispronounced gnocchi with money in his mouth, she corrected him in her head and smiled in her eyes. When a diplomat tried a joke in bad French, she adjusted the punchline silently and willed the table to laugh. Rehearsal is faith you perform alone. She told herself she was not hiding. She was ripening. The difference is patience. Hiding feels like shrinking. Ripening feels like heat meeting fruit. Some days she believed it. Some days she did not. Tonight, belief returned with the weight of a palm on a silver tray. She rolled her shoulders once and let the kitchen's foreign chorus pass through her. Spanish commands, Haitian Creole jokes, Cantonese curses sweetened into camaraderie. "You okay?" asked Bibi at the pastry station, whose hands could fold a millefeuille like an apology. "He's a show," Amara said. "Show's end." Bibi pointed a spatula at her. "Just make sure this one ends with you counting." Counting. She could do that in 12 systems, from Mandarin rods to Yoruba tones. She looked down at her hands, ordinary hands, nicked by work, and watched them recall a different ledger, the ink on a wrist in the dining room, the ink on a photo in a file she had not been permitted to touch. The characters were the same. They did not care whether a man wore a suit or a jumpsuit, whether a body was breathing or not. Writing is stubborn like that. She lifted the tray. Through the porthole window, the dining room rolled past like a slow tide. Gold, glass, faces hung with expectations. At the table near the center, the boy anchoring his courage with both elbows, the woman in yellow trying to square her past with this present, and the man who thought money was a microphone. He had offered a number as if numbers were knives. She had seen sharper, statistics that flatten grief, projections that erase neighborhoods, odds that sit on widows. Language had always been her counterweight. Tones, cases, particles, little gears that moved the world when arranged correctly. She had trained machines to hear the grain of a vowel and tell you whether a man was lying or simply lonely. She had watched men who moved armies lean forward because she had chosen however instead of but. She had learned that please in the wrong mouth is a trap, and that the softest no is architecture if you place it right. She pushed the door and let the room's heat clasp her. The violin found a gentler path. The chandeliers stitched light into a net. She thought of her father counting off a standard 1, 2, 3, 4, breathing the bar that would either heal or break the night. Music is just math you can dance to. Language is math you can live inside. At the edge of the carpet, she paused long enough to aim her attention like a camera. The boy first. Always the boy first. She would give him a bridge he could walk without asking permission. She would give him a conversation instead of a test. And she would give the man with the ink something he did not own. A mirror. Bibi's voice floated from the pass. Table 12. As if this were an ordinary plate on an ordinary night. Amara smiled at the fiction. Then she carried her 12 doors back into the gold light, ready to open the one the room had tried to lock. They had built a small empire around the table, polished candelabra steady as centuries, roses housed in silver, glassware aligned like ranks. Vincenzo sat at the head, cobalt suit carved sharp as a verdict, tattoos announcing jurisdiction. Mafia stamped into brow, boss curling his cheek and jaw. To his right, the lawyer, a slab of a man with an ironed face, rubbed his thumb over a cufflink as if warming a coin. To his left, the Chinese arms broker smiled with the careful ease of someone who never hurries, because time belongs to him. Half a step behind, in a yellow blazer that held its own light, May watched everything without appearing to. Luca occupied the seat closest to the money, tuxedo small and brave. He had nudged his knife and fork into rails and was guiding a pencil down them, catching it at the cliff of the linen before it fell. When he tired of gravity, he drifted to the napkin, drawing characters with an invisible ink only he could see. Amara approached with water. The lawyer measured her in a glance. The broker catalogued her, amused. May's gaze held a thread of something else, interest sharpened by caution, like a woman who knows she is standing in a crowded room with an open window no one else has noticed. "You work for tips," Vincenzo said, voice pitched for spectators. He fanned the cash with tattooed fingers, then slapped the stack flat. "Here's your tip of a lifetime." Laughter cracked like ceremonial gunfire, barks from the lawyer, lacquered chuckles from the broker, obedient echoes from orbiting men who wanted to be remembered. Luca flinched. He gathered himself in the next breath and returned to tracing his silent characters. May didn't laugh. Her eyes slipped to Vincenzo's wrist, where the cuff had ridden back, exposing ink in deliberate strokes. Amara noticed the pause. She followed the look and saw the proverb curved over tendon and pulse, 4 compact characters written with discipline. Jing Zhe Yan Shen. The brushwork was steady enough to have been practiced on rice paper before being branded into skin. The phrase opened a door in her chest. In the file room of memory, a photograph waited. Fluorescent light, a detective's throat clearing, her father's stillness. At the edge of that image, the same characters, inked on a different man's wrist. Today, alive and animated, they moved when Vincenzo lifted his glass. May's mouth tightened, then stilled. She folded her hands, as if to restrain them from speaking what couldn't be said aloud. "May I show you the specials?" Amara asked, placing the leather menu on its stand. She addressed the boy first, shaping the syllables so he could read her lips if he wanted, then angling the page toward the table. She did not let her eyes rest on the money. "We don't need stories," the lawyer said. "We need Chinese." "Let her read," the broker murmured, smiling. "Authenticity is entertainment." Vincenzo waved permission as one might flick away ash. The chandeliers poured gold. A violinist at the back worked his bow into something like calm. The first page bore French nouns, confident as titles. The second page offered crisp Mandarin glosses. Someone in this kitchen respected language enough to honor its edges. At the bottom, in discreet italics, an English translation of the proverb, "The quietest voice speaks the deepest truth." They had put it there like a restaurant's secret signature, a philosophy scrawled in miniature. Her breath thinned, then steadied. Li Xia, a name forming out of implication. Luca's mother, Chinese. Letters she might have written, proverbs she might have loved, now stamped into the flesh of the man who mocked her child's silence. Not tribute, trespass. Amara looked at Luca. He had drawn the first stroke of quiet on the napkin's ghost page, horizontal, confident, then hesitated over the vertical. She lowered to his eye line and signed small. Good form. He blinked, surprised, then flicked his eyes to her mouth as she shaped a gentle Mandarin greeting he could feel more than hear. The almost smile that answered was a fragile thing with a backbone. "See?" Vincenzo announced, pleased with his own stagecraft. "Halfway there already." He tapped the cash again, 1-2, 1-2, like a man counting down an execution. May leaned an elbow toward the table's edge, a motion so slight it passed for adjusting her sleeve. "Vincenzo," she said, soft as a warning bell. He didn't look at her. "Drink orders?" "Water for the child," the lawyer said, his gaze never leaving Amara. "So there are no excuses." Amara poured for Luca, angling the glass toward his dominant hand and placing the coaster exactly where his elbow wouldn't strike it. She narrated the simple act in mid-register Mandarin, then signed its bones. "Careful, cold, yours." Luca's shoulders loosened, an inch of daylight appearing between boy and father. The broker settled into his chair. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, curious in the way collectors are curious about provenance. "Practice," she said, and lifted the menu as shield and invitation. "May I recommend the broth?" The chef built it like a story, clear first, then depth. "We're not here for poetry," the lawyer muttered. "That's unfortunate," Amara said politely, "because your wrists are full of it." She didn't look at Vincenzo's ink when she said it. She watched May instead, and something unknotted behind the woman's eyes. Vincenzo pretended not to hear. "Go on." She let the room's weight settle and began where languages and appetites share a border. In Mandarin, she described the broth's patience, its hours of low fire, the ginger that warmed without announcing itself, the star anise that whispered around the edges. She signed the key notes for Luca, warmth, thyme, quiet spice, then let the English translation arrive for the others like a second plate. The broker's smile thinned. The lawyer stopped polishing his cufflinks. Across the dining room, chairs shifted, the anonymous audience angling without moving. "Enough," Vincenzo said lightly, controlling the tempo again with a rap of knuckles on wood. You make soup sound like scripture. Impress us. Make him laugh. The cash waited, green and theatrical. Amara didn't chase the money. She offered Luca a small riddle, the kind that sits comfortably in hands. Which is louder, the bell or the air that carries it? She signed the question, then whispered its Mandarin version so the vibrations were there if he wanted them. He thought, finger still over the half-formed character on the napkin. He tapped once, twice, then pointed to the air and grinned like someone who had just unlocked a door no one else saw. The grin did something to the ink on Vincenzo's face. It looked older. He pressed his lips together. Cute, he said. Now keep going. May's voice was quieter than the chandeliers. Let her finish. Please. Amara turned the menu so the proverb at the bottom met the wrist that claimed it. She held the pose for the length of a heartbeat, enough for May to see the mirror, enough for Vincenzo to feel the theft reflected back at him, enough for the room to sense, without names, that something sacred had been mishandled. Desecration has a temperature. She felt it at her sternum, a clean, cold line. Very good, the lawyer said, performing boredom. What else? A promise. Amara answered, to Luca alone and in his language. No tests. A conversation. Your pace. He nodded, quick and bright. Then she straightened, folded the menu, and set it down so the 4 characters kissed the white linen. The quietest voice speaks the deepest truth. Across the table, the tattooed wrist twitched, whether from memory or recognition. She couldn't tell. She didn't need to. The room had already begun to lean her way. A laugh ricocheted from the table like a thrown bottle. Maybe she only knows kitchen Spanish, the lawyer barked, eyes narrow as coins. The arms broker stepped in with a polite scoff that sounded rehearsed. The men around them folded the joke into applause. Cruelty tastes better with company. Amara did not answer the jibe. She met Vincenzo's inked gaze instead, the man who believed skin could carry history like a medal. For a heartbeat, the room balanced on that look, a scale with money on one side and a woman's quiet on the other. If I can serve your son, explain each dish in Mandarin, and converse in his sign language, you'll double it, 500,000, and apologize to him publicly, she said, voice steady as a metronome. The words were clean and economical, a bargain written in plain script. She watched the cash fold under the lights like a question. Silence pooled. Someone in the back swallowed audibly. The violinist's bow dipped in hesitation. The air seemed to check its pulse and then continue differently. Vincenzo's smile flexed, as if a muscle had learned to do pride on cue. His fingers toyed with the edge of a napkin. Raise it to 500, he said, measured and theatrical, already owning the mathematics of theater. Apology included if the kid smiles. He slid the money forward like a dare. The lawyer clapped in slow sarcasm. Bold, he said. She's betting on sentiment. Betting on what she knows, May murmured under her breath. For the first time, she sounded not like a clock, but like a person with blood in her throat. Her knuckles whitened against the rim of her glass. You'll kneel if you fail, Vincenzo added, the nails of his fingers tapping the wood as if ticking down a timer. Kneel and say you were never more than a tray and a smile. The laughter rose again, this time with a sharper edge. Men who build fortunes on other people's silence love to invent rules where they can. Kneeling would be a public unmaking, the kind of ceremony that erases dignity on polished floors. Amara bowed her head slightly, a nod that folded with practiced courtesy but carried an undercurrent of something else, a refusal to be hurried into fear. Agreed, she said. The room registered the word like a bell. Vincenzo's gesture clipped the air, deal sealed in a flick of an expensive thumb. His eyes glinted as if he had lit a match and was eager to watch how it burned. When she stepped back, the servers at the pass exhaled in small professional puffs. Bibi, at the pastry station, mouthed a useless prayer and tilted her spatula like a talisman. The kitchen shifted its choreography. The line became a quiet furnace, every chef's motion a silent blessing. The staff, accustomed to the theater of the rich, had not seen this exact script before. A wager where the wagerer peered like a predator into a woman's small heart. Alone with the tray, Amara felt the world narrow in a way she recognized from classrooms and conference booths and interrogation rooms where language was the battleground. She closed her eyes and let 12 tongues roll past like train cars. Mandarin, Cantonese, Shanghainese, Hakka. The soft-bodied politeness of Italian she'd used in negotiation rooms. Clipped English that had once steered debates at the UN. Each tongue had a weight, a particular pulley to lift meaning, and she set them now onto a rack in her mind like knives for a cook. This was not vanity. This was the economy of survival she had been trained for. At Oxford, she had proven how syntax could nudge thought. In Geneva, she had watched diplomats choose words like currency. In a basement lab, she had taught machines to listen for the difference between threat and nuance. Language is architecture, she reminded herself. Walls and bridges and the spaces in between where people either walk or fall. She breathed in slowly, letting the cellar's steam and the kitchen's iced windows bracket her thought. Tonal contours. They must be exact. Mandarin does not forgive a wandering pitch. Chinese sign is not just gesture. It is spatial grammar. Grammar that builds sentences in 3 dimensions and folds meaning into the room like origami. Her hands, though scarred from years of dishwork and dishwashing, remembered how to shape those dimensions. Her mouth remembered the arc of a tone. Her throat, the care for a soft retroflex. Amara ran a checklist like a teacher preparing a test bank. Pronunciation, precise. Rhythm, conversational, not theatrical. Register, humble, not apologetic. Visual channels, exaggerated mouth shapes for the boy to lip read if needed. Clear, slow signing for his hands. Tactile cues, place a spoon to indicate warmth. Point to the vase for metaphor. She thought of the boy's pencil tracks, horizontal, hesitant, and planned a small game that would scaffold his confidence rather than demand it. Silence pooled. Someone in the back swallowed audibly. The violinist's bow dipped in hesitation. The air seemed to check its pulse and then continue differently. Vincenzo's smile flexed, as if a muscle had learned to do pride on cue. His fingers toyed with the edge of a napkin. "Raise it to 500, he said, measured and theatrical, already owning the mathematics of theater. Apology included if the kid smiles. He slid the money forward like a dare. The lawyer clapped in slow sarcasm. "Bold," he said. "She's betting on sentiment." "Betting on what she knows," May murmured under her breath. For the first time, she sounded not like a clock, but like a person with blood in her throat. Her knuckles whitened against the rim of her glass. "You'll kneel if you fail," Vincenzo added, the nails of his fingers tapping the wood as if ticking down a timer. "Kneel and say you were never more than a tray and a smile." The laughter rose again, this time with a sharper edge. Men who build fortunes on other people's silence love to invent rules where they can. Kneeling would be a public unmaking, the kind of ceremony that erases dignity on polished floors. Amara bowed her head slightly, a nod that folded with practiced courtesy but carried an undercurrent of something else, a refusal to be hurried into fear. "Agreed," she said. The room registered the word like a bell. Vincenzo's gesture clipped the air, deal sealed in a flick of an expensive thumb. His eyes glinted as if he had lit a match and was eager to watch how it burned. When she stepped back, the servers at the pass exhaled in small professional puffs. Bibi, at the pastry station, mouthed a useless prayer and tilted her spatula like a talisman. The kitchen shifted its choreography. The line became a quiet furnace, every chef's motion a silent blessing. The staff, accustomed to the theater of the rich, had not seen this exact script before. A wager where the wagerer peered like a predator into a woman's small heart. Alone with the tray, Amara felt the world narrow in a way she recognized from classrooms and conference booths and interrogation rooms where language was the battleground. She closed her eyes and let 12 tongues roll past like train cars. Mandarin, Cantonese, Shanghainese, Hakka. The soft-bodied politeness of Italian she'd used in negotiation rooms. Clipped English that had once steered debates at the UN. Each tongue had a weight, a particular pulley to lift meaning, and she set them now onto a rack in her mind like knives for a cook. This was not vanity. This was the economy of survival she had been trained for. At Oxford, she had proven how syntax could nudge thought. In Geneva, she had watched diplomats choose words like currency. In a basement lab, she had taught machines to listen for the difference between threat and nuance. Language is architecture, she reminded herself. Walls and bridges and the spaces in between where people either walk or fall. She breathed in slowly, letting the cellar's steam and the kitchen's iced windows bracket her thought. Tonal contours. They must be exact. Mandarin does not forgive a wandering pitch. Chinese sign is not just gesture. It is spatial grammar. Grammar that builds sentences in 3 dimensions and folds meaning into the room like origami. Her hands, though scarred from years of dishwork and dishwashing, remembered how to shape those dimensions. Her mouth remembered the arc of a tone. Her throat, the care for a soft retroflex. Amara ran a checklist like a teacher preparing a test bank. Pronunciation, precise. Rhythm, conversational, not theatrical. Register, humble, not apologetic. Visual channels, exaggerated mouth shapes for the boy to lip read if needed. Clear, slow signing for his hands. Tactile cues. Place a spoon to indicate warmth. Point to the vase for metaphor. She thought of the boy's pencil tracks, horizontal, hesitant, and planned a small game that would scaffold his confidence rather than demand it. Amara dipped her head toward the steam and let Story sit on it like a bird on a warm current. "Henju yi qian," she began, once, a long time ago, and signed the timeline with her left hand while the right pulled place into the air. A fisherman and his son, a gray sea learning the weather of their small boat, silence as natural as tide. The boy could not speak, but he could attend. He read wave height like a book, measured wind with an upturned palm, counted gulls, and found the number in the net hours later. The ocean, eventually, learned him back. Her Mandarin moved without squeak or pride, consonants placed, vowels warmed, tones precise as a metronome hidden under velvet. She matched meaning in space, pointing low for undertow, arcing high for the leap of fish, shaping the cup of a shore in air so Luca could stand inside the sentence. When the father failed a knot, the boy's hands corrected it. When a storm shouldered the boat, the boy pressed a palm to the gunwale and felt where the calmer water waited. He touched his father's sleeve and showed the direction with his body. They returned by listening to what loud men do not hear. May's lips moved soundlessly, as if her mouth remembered the passage from some old anthology, a parable told in schools and kitchens, smuggled in folk tales and speeches. She mouthed a line just before Amara spoke it aloud, the synchronization so exact it made her shiver. Precision recognizes itself. The lawyer made a small, involuntary sound, the grunt of a man who suspects he's been quietly outmaneuvered and cannot yet name the game. The arms broker sipped and stared as if provenance had just tripled a painting's value in front of him. Amara slipped small questions into the flow, signing them to Luca as eddies rather than dams. What did the sky smell like? Which knot would you tie? When he answered, tap, point, shy shape of fingers, she incorporated his answers into the next sentence so he could feel the weight of contribution. Story is a scaffold. She built it till he could climb without looking down. Steam thinned. She angled the spoon and placed it where he could reach without knocking the bowl. Chong Chong, she said. Try it, and drew the character for sweet with 2 fingers on the white linen's invisible page, then for sour across her own palm. He mirrored her, smiling wider, mirroring the strokes he had traced earlier onto the napkin's blankness, horizontal, then vertical, then the small hook that makes a word into itself. The violinist, emboldened by something he did not have language for, found a progression simple enough to cradle the tale and stayed there. No flourishes, a kindness. Chandeliers hummed. Somewhere a cork decided the moment needed no pop. Amara led the father and son into a fog that erased the line between sea and sky. She lowered her voice as if fog required reverence and signed in slower arcs so the idea of thickened air could lay itself between them. In the white, the father panicked, the old enemy of men who mistake volume for certainty. The boy closed his eyes, opened his hands, and felt the boat's faint persuasion. To port, a deeper quiet. To starboard, a rougher rhythm. He touched the oar and showed the answer without a syllable. The ocean, having been taught, obeyed. Luca laughed again. Longer now, clear enough to startle the lawyer into looking at him as a person rather than a prop. May's hand climbed to her throat and stayed there, the way a hand returns to a scar when weather shifts. Amara let the proverb walk in barefoot at the end, not as a banner, but as a footprint. Jing Jian Shen, she said softly, signing each idea so Luca could hold it. The quiet one speaks the deepest truth. She didn't glance at the wrist that had stolen the words. She let the boy keep them. For a moment, no one moved. The room had wandered into a clearing it didn't know it wanted. The cash on the table looked green and loud and silly. Vincenzo tried to restart the world. Cute, he said again, but the word arrived late and fell through the surface. He drummed his fingers, found that the rhythm no longer belonged to him, and reached for his glass. The tattoo on his wrist flexed. The proverb looked suddenly like a confession. Amara refilled Luca's water and narrated the action in Mandarin, signed its small choreography, careful, cool, yours. Then added English for the table, a final braid that allowed no one the excuse of not understanding. Jiangsu ren hui ba suanzuo de xianghui yi, she said, smiling slightly. People from Jiangsu make sour taste like memory. Luca took a spoonful and nodded solemnly, as if accepting a pact. The broker leaned forward, caught between curiosity and awe. Your tones, he said, almost to himself, are educated. Practice, she answered, which was true and not the whole truth. She folded the story closed with an easy clasp and looked to Luca for permission to leave the bowl. He tapped twice, his yes, and she stood. Heat from the steam stitched into her blouse. At the fringe of the room, men who had come to watch a waitress lose interest began to track their breathing to the violin's soft line. A camera phone lowered, being used less as a weapon and more as a witness. The lawyer's jaw worked, then held. May's eyes were wet but unbroken, her mouth shaped without sound, the word "sie" to no one and to everything. Amara let the quiet stand. Then, as if they were merely dining and not negotiating the shape of a boy's future, she outlined the next dish with the same gentleness. Mushrooms from a northern forest, tofu that learned patience, noodles that wanted company. She signed the nouns, offered the flavors as colors, and left space for Luca to color back. He did. When she stepped away, the echo of his giggle lingered like a bell you don't need to strike twice. It threaded the crystal and the candles and the cash and showed each object what it was. For the first time all evening, Vincenzo's smirk forgot its choreography. It faltered, wobbled, then pretended it had meant to become something else. The room should have returned to appetite between courses, but something in it refused. Conversation drifted, light and shapeless, then thinned to threads again. Vincenzo changed chairs without moving, leaned left, leaned back, adjusted a cuff that didn't need adjusting. Restlessness announced itself in small edits. The ink at his brow looked darker. The word on his cheek cast a longer shadow. Luca, who had lived so carefully inside silence that it had become a home, laughed again, smaller now, but easy, as if the first laugh had built a bridge and this one remembered how to cross. The sound put a fine crack through the boss's composure. He lifted his wine and didn't drink, watching the glass as though the answer might surface there like a coin at the bottom of a fountain. Amara's calm worked the way tide works. You don't see it move, and then the shoreline is different. She thanked the runner bringing the next course, checked a garnish, and returned to the boy's eye level as if ritual were a discipline and not a trick. Every part of her said this is ordinary, the way a surgeon's voice says we'll start now in a room hung with machines. Ordinary done perfectly unsettles men who sell spectacle. The violinist found his breath and let the bow breathe with him. Candlelight kept its appointment with silver. The staff moved like handwriting no one noticed. Everything behaved except the man who wanted to be obeyed. A memory brushed his face, quick as mothwing. It didn't ask permission. He flinched and covered the motion by flicking a crumb that wasn't there. Licia. The name passed through him like a draft from an old door. Years peeled back with a shrug of the shoulder. Another restaurant. No chandeliers, no press of money, just a Cantonese place with fluorescent certainty and tiled tables that remembered too many elbows. She had worn yellow then, too, not the exact yellow, but close enough that the memory could borrow it from May's blazer. She said his name the way a violin says a note, true, without ornament. Enough, she had told him, voice pitched for a man, not a courtroom. No more collections that end in grief. He'd laughed because the easiest way to dodge consequence is to make it sound sentimental. You married a businessman, he said, palms up, like a man proving he carried nothing. Business is business. Debt is not an altar, she answered. Stop leaving people on it. They had fought over nouns. He tried to trade mercy for margin, future for respect. She refused the exchange. He called it pride. She called it clarity. When the shouting emptied itself, she went quiet the way mountains go quiet, by not moving an inch. I'm taking Luca, she said. If you keep the work, you lose us. He had thought she would revise when faced with wind and paperwork. She did not. She signed papers with a hand that didn't shake, packed a suitcase with the neatness of a woman who could fold grief smaller than a drawer, and left a note whose last line cut clean. Protect his quiet. It's where he thinks. He tried to be offended into love. He tried to be wealthy at her. He tried to let time do the work and rot her resolve. When time didn't help him, men did. He found where she had nested. He rang a bell made of favors. She moved again. The third time, the bell called something colder. Afterward, in a room where people lie on carpets and stare at ceilings that don't answer, he told himself the word accident until it stopped sounding like an excuse and started sounding like weather. He boarded up the draft that had her name on it and hired different men to count his money. He told the boy a story about how the world breaks and how men like them must break back. But children will save fragments of a language you didn't respect. Luca traced characters on fogged windows and couch backs and his own skin. He grew a habit of looking toward the corner of rooms where no one stood, as if someone quieter than prayer lived there. Vincenzo learned to avoid the boy's eyes when he laughed, because laughter was a country where he had no passport. Now, years and deals later, the laugh returned, and a waitress in red spoke it fluently. A thread of irritation pulled tight under his ribs. He wanted to call it control. It wasn't. He looked at May and saw Alicia's posture in the way grief can teach a woman to sit perfectly still. He looked at the broker and saw curiosity sharpened to assessment. At the lawyer, and saw a man studying the difference between spectacle and loss. He turned back to the cash, reliable, obedient, and found it looked stupid. Money hates to be seen. Amara's hand hovered over the second dish like a benediction that neither sanctified nor begged. She signed a small instruction to Luca. Careful, hot, your pace, and layered Mandarin around the gestures, letting tones climb and descend like a staircase he could take one step at a time. The boy nodded, attentive, his mouth relaxed in a way Vincenzo had not realized it could. Restlessness crawled into the boss's fingers. He drummed, stopped, reached for the napkin, refolded it, made a new crease that pretended to be intention. May leaned forward, elbows a whisper over linen. "Vincenzo," she said, not quite looking at him, as if speaking to the air might make it gentler. "Maybe let her finish." "Finish?" He smiled without warmth. The word came out with gravel in it. "She's just begun." "Then let the beginning be clean," she said. Her voice didn't travel far, but it landed everywhere it needed to. He looked at her, then through her, then past her, as if the room might offer him a different answer if he chose a different wall. Old anger lifted its head, hungry for the leash he kept handy. The violinist's line thinned to a single, held note that made even the glasses listen. Men at the surrounding tables tried to perform nonchalance and found their props insufficient. Phones hovered and didn't rise. Some things you don't film if you want them to live. Amara continued with a grace that looked like surrender until you noticed its spine. She invited Luca to trace the steam with 2 fingers, to read the bowl's heat as though it were handwriting. He mimed the old characters, horizontal, vertical, the small hook that turned sound into meaning. She nodded, placing the compliment where he'd find it. Vincenzo shifted again. The ink at his wrist, those stolen characters, seemed to pulse. The proverb had felt like armor when he paid to wear it. Tonight it itched like hair-shirt truth. Jing Jie Yanshin. The quiet one speaks the deepest truth. He had taken the sentence from the woman who knew what it meant and tattooed it into a body that refused to learn. May watched him watching it. She remembered her sister laughing in a kitchen where the air tasted like ginger, remembered Luca's baby hands patting steam, remembered the last message. Take care of him until he is old enough to take care of himself. Make space so his quiet can stay bright. She had failed at the first sentence and had been failing at the second, carefully, in good clothes. Shame is tidy when you have money. "Soup," the lawyer said, trying for normal. It came out brittle. The broker said nothing at all, his eyes on Amara the way a scientist watches a small, necessary miracle. Vincenzo forced his attention into the present like a heavy drawer. He lifted his glass, drank, and let the wine write heat into his throat. "Enough pastoral," he said. "Do the trick again." The word trick fell wrong in the room. It bounced once and lay there. Maybe because everyone had felt the story rearrange the furniture. Maybe because the boy's second laugh had sounded like a person being returned something he hadn't known was missing. Amara didn't correct him. She gave the correction to Luca instead, a question in Chinese sign folded into air. Which part should we keep? His fingers answered. A fragment of wave, a twist of rope, and she rebuilt the next sentence around his choice until it fit him. Language, handled honestly, can do that. Tailor a world and make you the right size for it. Another ripple of quiet moved outward. Even the men with the eager laughter went still, not out of kindness, but because the room had made something better than spectacle, and appetite recognizes better when it arrives. Vincenzo watched the waitress build a bridge from a boy to a bowl and found every board named after a thing he had broken: patience, attention, respect. He did the math he knew: cut loss, assert dominance, change terms, and almost opened his mouth to ruin it. May's hand touched his sleeve. Not a grip, a human contact. He looked at it as if it were a new technology. She didn't remove it. "Please," she said, barely sound. He should have shaken her off. He wanted to. Instead, for reasons he would later attribute to strategy and would at night suspect were something else, he left the sentence unsaid. The violinist released the held note. The chandeliers exhaled their gold. Amara placed a spoon at Luca's right, then signed the small ceremony of tasting as if it were a prayer. The boy obeyed and smiled, not the startled muscle flick from before, but the long, slow curve of recognition. The boss stared at that curve like a man reading his name in a language he'd stolen and never learned. He didn't know what the sentence meant yet. He only knew it was addressed to him. Steam had thinned to a lace over bowls. The violin held a single thread of tone, and the cash sat where he'd left it, green, theatrical, suddenly small. Amara rose from her crouch beside the boy and stood into the light the chandeliers made, a red silhouette with steady hands. She turned to Vincenzo as if to a pupil who'd interrupted class one time too many. Her mouth changed music. "Pensi che la lingua sia un trucco della bocca," she said in fluent Italian, each syllable unhurried, unflinching. "Ma le parole ricordano." You think language is a trick of the tongue, but words remember. A ripple passed through the room, the startled tilt of heads when a familiar script flips pages on you. The lawyer's eyes folded. The arms broker's smile lost a coat of polish. May went very still, as if holding a fragile bowl. Amara didn't raise her voice. She let the room come to it. She pivoted, addressing the table without breaking eye contact with the boy when she could. "Yu yi ju hua," she said in Mandarin, her tones measured like weights. "Jing zhe yan shen, zui an jing de ren, shuo chu zui shen de zhen xiang." There is a saying, the quiet one speaks the deepest truth. She shaped the same thought in English, for the men who heard only money. "Some sentences," she said, "don't need volume to carry judgment." Back to Italian, the silk turning to linen. "C'è un'altra idea," she added, palm open over the linen where the proverb sat printed in fine script. "Che I debiti non si saldano sempre col denaro. A volte il silenzio paga, quando diventa ascolto, rimorso, riparazione." There's another idea. Debts aren't always cleared with money. Sometimes silence pays. When it becomes listening, remorse, repair. Vincenzo's jaw worked as if learning a new verb. He glanced at the cash like a bad magician checking a stale trick. The tattoo at his wrist, those stolen characters, moved with the pulse he could not bribe. Amara breathed once, and memory aligned behind her like a choir. "Let's name the debt," she said calmly, nothing in her voice that asked for drama. She stepped closer, not enough to threaten, enough to anchor. "You killed a man named David Lewis for $40,000. Her gaze did not blink. "He was my father." Sound left the room as if the door had opened to a winter street. Glasses stopped being glass. The violin's bow hung in the air and could not find the string. Gasps traveled in a soft ring. One at the bar, one near the corridor, one crushed in May's throat. The lawyer's cufflink chimed against crystal, a ridiculous, incriminating music. The broker's mouth held a sliver of sympathy he had not planned to use in public. Luca stared at his father, the boy's body learning the equation of fear and recognition. He looked from the woman in red to the man with ink, and then to May, who pressed fingers to her lips as if to keep a hurricane inside. Vincenzo made a sound that wanted to be laughter and failed. "You," he began, and the word had gravel in it. "Tonight," Amara said, softer still, ignoring his broken sentence the way surgeons ignore theater. "Your son's laughter has paid that debt in full." It wasn't a flourish. It wasn't even an accusation. It was a conclusion, a line drawn under numbers no one at the table had thought to add. He slammed his palm on the table. The cash jumped. Silver rang like a startled flock. The roses wavered. One petal let go and fell audibly because the room had learned to listen. Vincenzo leaned forward as men lean forward when they plan to bite. But when he lifted his eyes, the choreography he relied on didn't arrive. The smirk had nothing left to stand on. A bodyguard at his shoulder shifted, then stopped, then let his chin dip half an inch. That was all it took. A second guard copied the motion. Obedience recognizes new gravity faster than pride does. The men who laughed on cue went mute, not out of virtue, but because the air had changed ownership. Amara did not flinch at the slam. "You inked a proverb you don't understand," she continued, not cruel. "You wore it like armor while making a boy live inside noise." She looked at Luca and signed. "Not your fault," slow and simple, and the boy's ribcage loosened a breath. "Enough!" the lawyer hissed, finally finding volume, but no one lent him authority. The violinist lowered his bow, then raised it again, unwilling to give the moment silence's funeral. May's voice arrived like cloth laid over a wound. "È vero," she whispered in Italian, eyes on the wrist that lied. "Le parole ricordano." Her gaze moved from the ink to the boy to Amara. She placed her palm flat upon the table, as if swearing something she could not yet speak aloud. Vincenzo yanked his sleeve down as if a cuff could unwrite a sentence. "You think a story changes anything?" He stabbed a finger toward the cash. "The only truth here is right there." "No," Amara said. She let English sit heavy. "The truth is seated beside you." She nodded to Luca. He understood every word that mattered. She turned to the boy, and the room followed. "Ni zuo de hun hao," she told him in Mandarin. "You did well." Then in Chinese sign, so he could hold it twice. "Brave, smart, yours." His eyes shone, not with tears, but with a clear, startled brightness, as if a fog in his chest had burned off. In the wake of her words, other truths became visible. The waiter by the door standing taller, the bartender's jaw unclenching, the guests near the windows abandoning their pretend conversations. Even the cash seemed to lose its aggressive color. It lay there pale as paper. Vincenzo glanced at his men again and saw, this time, that their faces had softened into something like reluctance. He reached for the old tools, menace in the eyes, weight in the shoulders, the tone built to make rooms obey. He found them dull. He lifted his glass, found his hand shaking, put it down so the tremor would belong to the stemware instead of him. Amara's voice thinned to a hush meant for the whole hall. "You can keep the money," she said. "Or you can keep your son's apology that you have not yet earned. You cannot have both. Debts don't clear that way." She turned her palm toward the menu where the tiny proverb glowed like a seal. "You wanted a lesson," she added. "This is what one costs." Luca, trembling now, looked at his father as if measuring him for the first time with an instrument built for truth. He lifted his hands, hesitant, and signed something simple. Why? May gasped, because the question wore his mother's grammar. Vincenzo looked at the small moving hands and could not find a price. The bodyguard's eyes dropped another fraction. The room, gently, left the man at the head of the table where he sat. Power had stepped 2 paces to the right and squeezed the boy's shoulder, and everyone felt it. Amara inclined her head to Luca one last time, then returned her gaze to the man who had mistaken ink for wisdom. "Words remember," she said, repeating the line in Italian until even the chandeliers could have translated it. "And tonight, they remembered you." Luca's hands rose like startled birds, and then settled into grammar. His fingers trembled, then found the old pathways his mother had drawn into them. Shapes unfurled between him and Amara, quick, certain, more certain than his breath. The room watched meaning appear without sound. Amara's face tilted toward him, the way a listener leans to catch a soft instrument. She repeated each phrase aloud so the whole hall could bear witness. First in Mandarin, tone perfect, steady as a metronome. "Ta shuo, ta yuan liang ni, na xie ni ting bu jian de shi." Then, in English, the echo made for the men who only believed what they could price. "He says, he forgives you for the things you cannot hear." The words did not land on Vincenzo. They opened him. For a beat, he seemed not to understand the sentence's aim, and then he did, and then whatever suspension his posture had been pretending to was gone. His mouth lifted halfway to a grin and failed. The failure turned into an awful, ordinary sob. Tears streaked through the ink on his face, dragging the letters down in shiny ropes. The word across his brow looked like it was washing off. No one moved. The lawyer froze mid-breath, caught between reflex and decency. The arms broker folded his hands, astonished at a calculus that included mercy. At the edge of the room, the bartender's shoulders softened, and the violinist set bow to string without sound, holding silence like a note. Mee pressed her fist to her lips. When she dropped it, there was a brightness on her skin that had nothing to do with chandeliers. She looked at Luca, at the fluency that had chosen love when vengeance would have been easier, and something unclenched behind her ribs. She bowed her head, just enough to place the moment somewhere sacred. Vincenzo reached for his napkin and missed. He tried again and caught it with clumsy fingers, swiping at his face as if the tears were evidence he could wipe away. The napkin came back tattooed in salt. He tried, and the word broke. He stared at his son as though the boy were a letter delivered years late and still somehow on time. Luca signed again, smaller now, so the air wouldn't break. Amara translated gently, Mandarin first, tones folded into breath. "Ta shuo ni kei shui." Then English. "He says, you can learn." A correction. A map. Not a pardon stamped and filed. A door, left unlocked. Vincenzo's hands opened, useless and human. The cash on the table looked suddenly like a costume from the wrong play. He pushed at it, once, a reflex of the old choreography, and the stack slid a little, meaningless. Money rarely looks more naked than when it cannot buy a thing standing 5 feet away. Amara reached for the bills without flinching and set them square in the center of the linen, aligning their edges as if aligning a thought. She did not count. She did not pocket. The green sat in the light like a confession. "J'ai chez moi," she said softly, and then in English, "The 250,000 stays here." Her palm hovered over it without ownership. Some debts can't be paid with money. No flourish, no sermon, just a sentence placed where it belonged. The staff held still, gravity recalibrated. A runner near the kitchen door made a small sound and stopped it with his hand. A woman at the bar wiped an already clean glass, once, and set it down like an offering. The room's gold deepened, as if the chandeliers had dimmed in reverence, not by wire, but by choice. Vincenzo's shoulders folded on themselves. He made the mistake men make when they try to refuse grief. He swallowed. The sob that followed arrived from the oldest part of him and bent him forward. He caught the edge of the table with both hands, knuckles pale against wood. For the first time in a long while, he was not performing strength. He was losing it. Luca's fingers hovered, uncertain whether to bridge or wait. Amara gave him the smallest nod, permission to choose his own courage. He lifted both hands and signed, open-palmed, "I am here." Amara offered the translation in Mandarin, then English, each time less like a translator and more like a witness handing truth down gently through languages so it would not break. May exhaled a sound halfway to prayer. She reached for Luca's shoulder and stopped herself in the same motion, then tried again and let her palm rest there. The boy leaned into it like a plant finding light. Vincenzo dragged in air. His gaze fell to the proverb printed on the menu, then to the same proverb banded around his wrist, and last to Amara. The tattoo had always felt like armor. Now it itched like accountability. Jingjae Yanshan. The quiet one speaks the deepest truth. He looked at his son and found the sentence finally had a subject. Mi dispiace, he rasped in Italian, the words unsteady, the grammar bare. He had to force his eyes up to the boy's. I'm sorry. The apology sounded like a person trying to remember how to use his hands. Luca didn't sign back. He breathed, which was enough. Amara stepped away from the table. Not retreat. Respect. She placed both palms briefly on the linen, a grounding of the moment, then straightened. Her gaze swept the room once. If anyone was about to turn this into a spectacle, they could read the cost in her eyes. She turned and began to walk toward the kitchen. Her footsteps made no theater. Behind her, a chair leg gave a small cry against tile. Someone stifled it with a hand. The violinist lowered his bow altogether and let the silence be music. Quiet sobbing filled the hall, first the boss's, then a softer chorus picked up by men who had been given back their throats. It was not penitence, not yet, but it was the sound of hearing beginning. Amara pushed through the brass rail swing door into steam and steel. Heat kissed her face. The kitchen's quick language resumed around her. Bibi lifted her eyebrows into a question. Amara answered with an almost smile. He heard, she said. What? Bibi asked, tilting a pan, trying not to crowd the miracle. What he's lost, Amara said simply, and set her tray down. On the other side of the door, the golden hall breathed, relearning how to be a room. A petal finally let go and fell. The cash waited, untouched, converting back into paper. Somewhere a phone screen dimmed and went black, as if even the witnesses agreed to keep this part for living, not for proof. At the threshold, May stood halfway between worlds, one hand on the door, the other on Luca's shoulder, her face turned toward the kitchen heat as if toward weather she trusted. She didn't call after Amara. She didn't need to. The lesson was already moving, down the table, across the carpet, through the tattoos, into the bones. Amara reached for a towel and folded it with precise corners. Outside, the sobbing continued, quiet, excavating. Inside, the line picked up its choreography, ladles, plates, steam, the ordinary work of feeding people who might this time taste what they were given. The leak began as a whisper in a back booth, then as a file name on a bartender's cousin's phone, then as a link that refused to stay in one place. By dawn, it had a headline. Mafia boss, humbled by black waitress who spoke 12 languages. Thumbnails froze the room in crystal. Amara in red, Luca's small, astonished smile, Vincenzo's ink glistening with tears. The clip made its own weather. People watched on trains and in offices and in kitchens with the water still running. Comments braided anger with awe. Shares climbed like a siren. By noon, a federal agent with a tired suit and a precise haircut stood beneath the chandeliers of La Fortuna and asked to see the manager, then the back office, then the liquor ledger, then the spare key to the safe. Paper makes more noise than phones when the right people turn it. By sunset, the Lewis case had a new file jacket and a fresh stamp. The detective, who had once folded the folder to his chest, watched the video twice and felt something old and unspent get up from the chair he'd left it in. The empire didn't collapse so much as unfasten. Suppliers stopped returning calls. A courier parked his van and didn't come back. The lawyer found himself staring at his own letterhead as if it had betrayed him. The arms broker bought a ticket and tried to become Fogg. Fogg is patient, so were the agents. A week later, they took him at an airport where glass kept the rain out and nothing else. Vincenzo went quietly because the cameras were there and he had not yet learned how to move without them. He wore a suit that had outlived its swagger and a mouth that had forgotten the choreography. The tattoo at his wrist looked smaller without the theater around it. The cuffs clicked with a finality that did not need volume. Charges stacked like plates: racketeering, money laundering, witness tampering, and under a heavier gravity, manslaughter. David Lewis, $40,000. A night behind a club where music outlived the man who made it. They read the counts. He listened like a man hearing weather reports for cities he'd never see again. At arraignment, he glanced toward the gallery as if expecting an orchestra. Instead, he found faces that had once dealt at his table and now looked past him, as if toward a door they could not yet admit was freedom. In a corner seat, May sat with her hands folded and her eyes dry, the precise posture of a woman holding a house steady in a wind. The trial took months and 2 winters of testimony from men who had made careers out of not remembering. Money wanted to forget. Paper would not. The video played only once. It didn't need an encore. When the verdict arrived, it came the way a tide comes: inevitable, indifferent, true. The judge asked if he had anything to say. He turned his head toward the back, found no chandeliers, and said in a voice that had never sounded so human, "Tell her thank you." Luca spent the interim inside systems designed to protect, fluorescent and kind and bureaucratic. He sent Amara 3 drawings: a bowl of steam, a boat in fog, and 2 hands making the sign for home. She answered with letters written in several scripts: English for the caseworker's file, Mandarin for courage, Chinese sign drawn in arrows, and gentle diagrams so he could practice. When the petition cleared and the guardianship papers arrived, the caseworker smiled like someone who gets to deliver mail with good news inside. Luca moved into an apartment with plants that were always greener than she expected, and a bookshelf that learned to hold 2 people. They built a schedule out of late dinners and early walks. She packed his lunches with labels in pinyin and character, a bilingual cartography of snacks. He taught her the signs his mother had used when the world got loud: breathe, wait, try again, and she taught him how to tune a sentence the way a musician tunes a string. When the nightmares came thin and sharp, she sat beside his door and told him stories through wood, words small as stitches. He slept. Invitations followed the headline like ships behind a beacon. Schools wanted assemblies, nonprofits wanted keynotes, a museum wanted a panel on language and power. Amara declined most of them. She accepted the ones that gave Luca a stage and a soft landing. They built a talk together and gave it a name that fit: the language of forgiveness. The first time they stood under lights, the boy's hands shook until she asked the room to clap in silence, palms waving, fingers bright. He looked up, saw a sea of quiet applause, and steadied. They taught a simple exercise. Speak a sentence in 3 ways. Mouth only, hands only, then both. And notice how meaning grows bones. They told a story about a fisherman and a boy who taught the ocean to listen. They never mentioned a name with ink. They didn't need to. By noon, a federal agent with a tired suit and a precise haircut stood beneath the chandeliers of La Fortuna and asked to see the manager, then the back office, then the liquor ledger, then the spare key to the safe. Paper makes more noise than phones when the right people turn it. By sunset, the Lewis case had a new file jacket and a fresh stamp. The detective, who had once folded the folder to his chest, watched the video twice and felt something old and unspent get up from the chair he'd left it in. The empire didn't collapse so much as unfasten. Suppliers stopped returning calls. A courier parked his van and didn't come back. The lawyer found himself staring at his own letterhead as if it had betrayed him. The arms broker bought a ticket and tried to become Fogg. Fogg is patient, so were the agents. A week later, they took him at an airport where glass kept the rain out and nothing else. Vincenzo went quietly because the cameras were there and he had not yet learned how to move without them. He wore a suit that had outlived its swagger and a mouth that had forgotten the choreography. The tattoo at his wrist looked smaller without the theater around it. The cuffs clicked with a finality that did not need volume. Charges stacked like plates: racketeering, money laundering, witness tampering, and under a heavier gravity, manslaughter. David Lewis, $40,000. A night behind a club where music outlived the man who made it. They read the counts. He listened like a man hearing weather reports for cities he'd never see again. At arraignment, he glanced toward the gallery as if expecting an orchestra. Instead, he found faces that had once dealt at his table and now looked past him, as if toward a door they could not yet admit was freedom. In a corner seat, May sat with her hands folded and her eyes dry, the precise posture of a woman holding a house steady in a wind. The trial took months and 2 winters of testimony from men who had made careers out of not remembering. Money wanted to forget. Paper would not. The video played only once. It didn't need an encore. When the verdict arrived, it came the way a tide comes, inevitable, indifferent, true. The judge asked if he had anything to say. He turned his head toward the back, found no chandeliers, and said in a voice that had never sounded so human, "Tell her thank you." Luca spent the interim inside systems designed to protect, fluorescent and kind and bureaucratic. He sent Amara 3 drawings, a bowl of steam, a boat in fog, and 2 hands making the sign for home. She answered with letters written in several scripts: English for the caseworker's file, Mandarin for courage, Chinese sign drawn in arrows, and gentle diagrams so he could practice. When the petition cleared and the guardianship papers arrived, the caseworker smiled like someone who gets to deliver mail with good news inside. Luca moved into an apartment with plants that were always greener than she expected, and a bookshelf that learned to hold 2 people. They built a schedule out of late dinners and early walks. She packed his lunches with labels in pinyin and character, a bilingual cartography of snacks. He taught her the signs his mother had used when the world got loud: breathe, wait, try again, and she taught him how to tune a sentence the way a musician tunes a string. When the nightmares came thin and sharp, she sat beside his door and told him stories through wood, words small as stitches. He slept. Invitations followed the headline like ships behind a beacon. Schools wanted assemblies, non-profits wanted keynotes, a museum wanted a panel on language and power. Amara declined most of them. She accepted the ones that gave Luca a stage and a soft landing. They built a talk together and gave it a name that fit: the language of forgiveness. The first time they stood under lights, the boy's hands shook until she asked the room to clap in silence, palms waving, fingers bright. He looked up, saw a sea of quiet applause, and steadied. They taught a simple exercise. Speak a sentence in 3 ways. Mouth only, hands only, then both. And notice how meaning grows bones. They told a story about a fisherman and a boy who taught the ocean to listen. They never mentioned a name with ink. They didn't need to.